Hey everyone, welcome back to yet another video, not episode of Red Donkey Projections. I'm Lucas, and I have Eric here as always.
Hey guys.
And today we'll be going through our updated 2022 governor election predictions. It's been a very long time since we did this, so let's get right into it. So we got a lot of updates we got to go through. So I first plotted through all the safe states that we don't want to discuss. Let's now head to some of the safe states that I do wish to discuss. Maryland, Larry Hogan cannot run for re-election. Wes Moore, who is a more progressive candidate, and the first African-American, possible African-American governor, should he win, is the Democratic nominee here. Actually won an upset. Peter Franchot and Tom Perez were the front runners, but honestly, kind of out of nowhere, Wes Moore ended up winning the primary. He'll be facing avid Trump supporter Dan Cox, who will probably lose this election in a very big margin. So Maryland is safe D. Rhode Island should be safe. Massachusetts, Charlie Baker has announced he's now running for re-election. Maura Healey is the frontrunner. She's the current attorney general, very favored to win. This will be a safe state regardless of the environment this year. Vermont, Phil Scott running for re-election. This is safe. And New Hampshire, Kristen Sununu is running for re-election, so that makes this one also safe. Now let's head to some of the more interesting states. I'll start off with the state of Maine. This is actually probably going to be a little bit closer than expected. Paul LePage is the Republican nominee. He's the former governor of the state. He's pretty well known to the electorate. That could be very beneficial to him, but LePage was pretty unpopular during his term, so that could end up hurting him. Jeanette Mills is running for re-election here. I think that she will end up winning, but it'll be a lean margin. Now let's head to the state of Florida. I will take this one as well. In Florida, we have Ron DeSantis facing off against, likelier than not, Charlie Crist, the former governor, who was actually a Republican back when he was governor. Charlie Crist, I think, is a pretty decent candidate, but given the current environment, it is not good for him at all. As a result, we will be putting this election as likely R. Let's head now to Eric, who will be covering the state of Nevada.
Yep. So Nevada it's going to be a pretty close election, not even because of the candidates, but just because of the environment. This is one of the states that is influenced and susceptible to the traditional red wave years. And as we keep saying, and as we're going to keep repeating, on net, the Democrats are going to have a really tough challenge winning the more competitive states and the more purple states, such as Nevada and part of the Rust Belt and other types of races. So in Nevada, we have Steve Sisolak, who is an incumbent, and he's up against Joe Lombardo, who is, I think, a former sheriff here. But because, Nevada tends to go with the types of red wave years, Steve Sisolak may have a tough time trying to, get the turnout out for him. So it's probably going to be a tilt D election. It's going to be pretty close here.
I agree with that characterization. We are going to go with tilt D in the state of Nevada. I'm going to now head to the state of New Mexico. This state will be very interesting because we have Mark Ronchetti, who, if you remember, he ran for Senate in 2020 in New Mexico. He actually came pretty close, closer than most people expected. He was 6 points away from defeating the incumbent here. First, because he's a pretty decent candidate, and the fact that Michelle Lujan Grisham has been caught up in quite a few scandals recently, that this race is probably going to be closer than expected. And I actually have this race as tilt D, which might be a little bit surprising. But given the candidates right now, this is what it's looking like it's going to be. In the state of Connecticut, Ned Lamont, I don't think he's really the most popular governor right now. And plus, Connecticut's elections for the governor have been pretty closer than normal than you would expect. So we're going to go with lean for Connecticut as well. I'll hand it over to Eric now, who will be taking the state of Pennsylvania.
Yep. So in Pennsylvania, we have the Republican governor, who is Doug Mastriano. If we remember about Doug Mastriano, he was pretty popular. His name was up a lot in during the primary because he was a staunch Trump supporter. He totally believed that Trump should have won the election, and that was pretty unpopular among Pennsylvanians, who tend to stick down the middle. A lot of centrists still believe that Joe Biden did win the election, so this is kind of unappealing to those voters. And on the Democratic side, I think it's a more moderate candidate, Josh Shapiro. He won the Democratic primary unopposed, and he has been doing, I think, a pretty public job of confronting Mastriano for his views. He's pretty pro-Trump, and that's how he's aligning himself. And we see not only in the governor race, but in the Senate race, how being so pro-Trump is not necessarily the best thing for such a swing state, right? So at the moment, I think Pennsylvania is going to go in a lean just because of how extreme the Republican candidate is.
I agree. I think it's turning off a lot of independent voters, spreading the big lie. Let's head now to the state of Michigan. They actually just had their primary here. The Michigan GOP did a horrible job fielding candidates. They sent very, very extreme candidates to the election. Who won the primary winner here was Tudor Dixon. She is a pretty far right candidate that has turned off a lot of independent voters, especially her views on abortion. She said that she's pro-life, no exceptions for any sort of conditioning, probably except for the health of the mother. So that's definitely going to be very bad for her in a state like Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer, I wouldn't say she's moderately popular. She was considered for VP under Biden, and I think she'll win this one in a pretty decent margin. We're going to go with lean D in Michigan. I will also now be discussing the state of Arizona, actually Colorado here first. The current governor here is Jared Polis. He is pretty popular. I don't think he'll have much of a problem getting reelected. We have this one as likely D. And in Minnesota, we have Tim Walz here. Tim Walz, also similar case. He should have no problem getting reelected. He's a pretty popular guy who has appealed to independents and Democrats. I think he'll win probably in a lean margin, just given Minnesota's trends and partisanship. Let me see. Is there anything else? In Texas, I'll hand this one over to Eric now.
Right, so let's go on to Texas now. It was actually going to be kind of interesting here. Some fun trivia. Matthew McConaughey was considering running, but I think he ended up turning that down. But it would have been pretty cool if an actor of his, of his fame, of his celebrity status, would be running for a Texas governor race. But he didn't decide to run. We see some familiar faces here in the Texas, Texas state politics. We have Greg Abbott, who is the Republican. He's been here for a while, pretty conservative Texan. And on the Democratic side, we have Beto O'Rourke, who has tried to run for Senate in 2018 against Ted Cruz, came pretty close to beating him, but I think still lost by about 2 points. He campaigned very actively. I think he's also campaigning pretty actively here, but I don't think he's visiting every Texas county like he did in 2018. But despite Beto O'Rourke's name recognition and his not popular but just known stance, I think he was pretty anti-gun, which is quite a bold stance to take in a state like Texas. And just in general, how still conservative Texas is, I think Greg Abbott's not going to have too much of a problem here, even though he's up against Beto O'Rourke, who is a pretty active candidate who really wants to get his ideas out there. He's just probably not going to be able to, outpace Greg Abbott. So it's probably going to be a likely here in Texas, as we've seen before. Possibly a lean if Beto O'Rourke steps up his campaigning towards the, the last couple of weeks before the election. But I don't think he's going to be able to win at the end.
I agree completely here. I believe that this is a likely R state for the governor election. Heading now to the state of Kansas. Kansas, we have the incumbent governor here, Laura Kelly. I don't want to say she's popular, but she's not doing too bad in terms of popularity. Unfortunately for her, though, Republicans nominated a pretty decent candidate, a pretty generic Republican candidate that would probably perform well in a red wave year like 2022 is looking like it's going to be. As a result, we are going to make this race likely R. So this is a flip. In the state of Georgia, I'm going to toss this one over to Eric.
One more thing about Kansas, which is interesting. It was actually all over the news probably a couple of weeks ago that the people of Kansas still voted to keep abortion legal in Kansas, which, shows how like the turnout for pretty important issues can still be pretty high. But yeah, to Lucas's point, in a red wave year, if we're gonna go overall as a candidate, not just on single issues, Laura Kelly will probably not win. On to Georgia. Here we have also familiar faces. We have Brian Kemp, who's the incumbent governor, and we have Stacey Abrams, who did try actually to run against the same guy in the last governor race. So it's actually the same match. And Stacey Abrams at first, kind of not shocked the stage, but lightened the stage because it wasn't expected at first that she would run again, but then she decided to run, and she seemed like the candidate that had the best chance of beating Brian Kemp because she's already been up against him. But I don't think she's actually been doing quite a lot of active campaigning recently. Maybe that's going to change in the coming weeks as the election does get closer. And also Brian Kemp is not a bad candidate to run in Georgia. He was one of those very prominent figures who did stand against Donald Trump. He did not, he didn't listen to Trump when he wanted to give the election to him. So he was one of those anti-Trump election type of figures in Georgia, and again, such a competitive state like Georgia, those voters do appreciate that because a lot of those independent purple voters aren't going to vote for someone who's going to be staunchly supporting Trump. So because of those reasons, Brian Kemp's probably going to win in a lead. He's probably not going to have too much of a problem, especially considering that Abrams hasn't been doing too much campaigning.
I agree here. I think it's not a great year for Stacey Abrams, so we're going to make this one a lean Republican, or rather, not a great year for Democrats in general. We're going to now head to the state of Arizona, where we have Katie Hobbs versus Kari Lake. This might be one of the few opportunities where Democrats can probably make a flip, because Kari Lake is a really bad candidate. I remember when we first started 2022 governor election predictions, we were thinking that Kimberly Yee was going to be the nominee. She outran many candidates on the top line several times as a Republican candidate. She dropped out. Instead, Kari Lake has won. She is a very staunch pro-Trump, and she has shown no sign of pivoting to the center in the general election. As a result, this will turn off many moderate and independent voters, making us believe that this election will actually go to Katie Hobbs in a very, very close tilt margin. Eric is going to take Wisconsin.
Yep. So in Wisconsin, we have Tony Evers, and he's a Democratic governor at the moment. He's a Democratic incumbent governor, but we're not really sure how long he's going to stay. I think the popularity has been declining as of, during COVID, I guess, because Wisconsin is one of the more conservative Rust Belt states. A lot of people, didn't approve of how he was handling COVID and just a lot of issues. It's just, once again, one of these states that are susceptible to red wave years. So he's probably going to get voted out. So we probably think that this is going to go in a tilt R. It's still probably going to be a competitive race, but once again, if it's a red wave year and more Republicans turn out because they're not satisfied with, how the trifecta at the moment is dealing with, current issues, then Tony Evers will lose and the Republican candidate will win.
Yep, I agree here. It's going to be a very, very close race, but we're going to go with tilt R. And finally, the state of Oregon. You're almost wondering why we kept Oregon as toss-up. So this is very interesting because there are three main candidates here: a Republican, a Democrat, and Betsy Johnson, who is an independent candidate. She formerly served as a Democrat in the state Senate in Oregon, but she's now running as an independent, as someone who is a centrist, who's going to appeal to moderate voters. Former Representative Kurt Schrader even endorsed her. So this is going to look like a very interesting three-way race, because it does look like Betsy Johnson is going to take away votes from the Democratic candidate, which could potentially lead to a Republican victory here. So we're going to leave this one as toss-up for now, but this is one that we will definitely keep track of until Election Day. And with that being said, that's the end of the video for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this episode, please hit the like button. If you like our content, please hit subscribe. And we'll see you in our next episode tomorrow.
See ya.